Oh, that's going to be an accident.
Yep, this guy hates me.
At this point, Tesla and self-driving technology go hand in hand. It's pretty much impossible to talk about a future of full self-driving cars without mentioning Tesla's efforts in the matter. Now, there are differing opinions when it comes to Tesla's use of camera vision as opposed to LiDAR, which a lot of other companies use to achieve full self-driving, but we can at least recognize that Tesla's full self-driving package, while it doesn't live up to its name yet, does provide a lot of great features that do full self-driving type of things for customers. I just recently got the full self-driving package on my Model Y, and I took it across LA using their Navigate on Autopilot feature for a few different long drives, and as you can imagine, I encountered quite a few bad drivers along the way and got to see how Autopilot would handle those. So let's get into the footage and see how Autopilot really handles against bad LA drivers. So this is Navigate on Autopilot. I just entered it on the on-ramp, and what they talk about is it can take you from Freeway on-ramp to off-ramp, including all the interchanges and everything. Let's see how it handles this right here. Actually was pretty aggressive. It's kind of staying right in the lane.
So that was a pretty solid lane change right there. It definitely was helped by the car behind me actually letting me in. But this next clip is phantom braking, and that is where the car is braking for seemingly no reason.
Back because, oh, there was some phantom braking. I don't know. Okay.
Now it's kind of hard to tell on video, but it went from 75 down to 71 all of a sudden for no reason. I mean, if we look around right here, there was nothing around me. There was that car next to me, but they were staying perfectly fine in their lane with no intention of getting over.
Those are scary sometimes because it just decides to brake, not exactly sure why. And if that car behind me had been closer, I'm kind of afraid of getting rear-ended at times.
Now here's another example of phantom braking. You'll see right here it pauses just for a second next to this Penske truck and then continues. Again, it might not seem that extreme, but if you look, I went from 74 down to 67 out of nowhere. But if we zoom in on the Penske truck, we can see it was drifting from its lane, so Autopilot did stop just for a second because it did seem like it was going to have to take evasive action for that truck. But if we circle around me, there was no one next to me, so I think the better course of action would have been to swerve a little bit into the lane next to me as opposed to slamming on the brakes for a quick second.
So what's cool about lane changing is I just signal it and it does it when it can. So right there I signaled and it waited a second to make sure. That one was pretty accurate, but let me give you an example here. This Kia is pulling up to the left. I'm going to just signal. It obviously waits until they pass, and then it goes for it. Sometimes it's a little slow for my taste, especially when it's a tight interchange, but for the most part it's actually pretty assertive and it gets in there pretty well. But here's one of these quick turns where it feels like I'm hanging pretty far right and getting awfully close to this CRV. Yeah. It's like when you look at it and really pay attention, I'm still 2 feet away, but it's a lot closer than I'm used to being.
Now, I was just talking about how a lot of times it rides the outside of the lane. It gets too close to the car next to it. So I was expecting that to happen right here with this semi. But actually, interestingly enough, it did a really good job here and actually was hanging far left of the lane. If you look at the visualization on screen, you can see that it is actually riding a little bit left right there, but it might be feeling very comfortable about that because this Lexus next to me is also very far left in their lane.
Now, before we go any further, I want to point out that this video is made from about 2.5 hours of footage that I took. So I'm condensing it down to 15 minutes or maybe a little longer, and I'm showing you the good cases and the bad cases, but it's important to keep in mind that these are all edge cases. For the rest of the 2 hours or so that I was driving with Autopilot, there was nothing really to show because it was just cruising along and doing exactly what it should do. So it's not like if you have the full self-driving package, you're constantly encountering it doing really great things and doing really bad things. Most of the time, it's just doing a good job. So at the next opening, I'm going to try to get over. There's this Lexus right here. I'm just going to signal, see what it does. Slowed down to get behind the Lexus. How's it going to handle this truck? Oh, barely made it. Actually didn't make it. I crossed that yellow line for sure.
So this next clip was one of the worst instances I've had so far, where I purposely brought myself into the slow lane to see how it would handle this merge. And as you can see right here, it kind of doesn't realize it's happening, and right there I engage and slam on the brakes. Now, I'm not going to put this fully on autopilot. Let's watch it again. Because I purposely brought myself into this lane, autopilot wouldn't have automatically done that for me, but it should have seen this coming right here a little better than it did. Now, I assume automatic braking would have taken over, but I wasn't about to risk that. Now, here's a fun one. Autopilot didn't really have to do much here, but just a prime example of a Mercedes just driving terribly in LA. We see this kind of driving all the time, just cutting people off, trying to pass all of the traffic and trying to get there so much faster than everyone else. Here's an example of autopilot wanting to get me into the carpool lane. I confirm it, and it goes partially into that lane and then changes its mind, and then it goes for it for real. And if we look back at the other camera angles, there was really no reason for that, and I'm not really sure why that happened. That's another one of those weird things that just happens sometimes. I guess you could call it phantom steering.
Real quick, if you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up so that more people can find it, and subscribe to this channel for lots more videos about Tesla and tech in general.
Now here are a couple merges in a row that autopilot handles pretty well. I mean, it's not 100% perfect, but you can see there were no cars next to me there, and it stays in this lane, and now it's going to have to merge again. It wants me to lane change, but I just wanted to see what the merge would do anyway, so I had my hand on the wheel just to make sure, but overall it did a good job. It was just pretty heavily riding the outside of the lane here if we watch it again from this angle. Here's an example of another terrible LA driver just trying to speed around everyone, and the reason I'm putting this in is because autopilot handled this well even though he was coming up quick behind. It just stayed there because, I mean, what else are you going to do? So this was in the middle of some traffic where the lane to the right of me is the lane autopilot wants to get into, but the cars are going by very fast. So I was curious to see what autopilot did. I signaled right here, and it actually was pretty aggressive getting in that lane. If we check it out from the other side angle, you can see those cars were coming up pretty quick, and autopilot got right in there. It sped up. It did a very good job. So right here, I'm merging onto the freeway, and autopilot beeped at me, as you just heard. And it beeped at me to let me know that my hands need to be on the wheel, which it normally does periodically, but this time it actually did it in the moment because it seemed like it was probably a little unsure about this move. But it did pull it off with no issue and no interference for me other than proving that I'm there. Right here, it might be hard to see, but this is one of my biggest pet peeves with autopilot. As soon as the merge lines disappear, it automatically lane centers. Now, it's always trying to lane center, but it does it no matter how wide the lane is.
So it's going to get me onto the 405 right now, 405 north. It just slowed my speed quite a bit. I guess it's reacting to that car. It just seems kind of far.
Now, in order to complete this maneuver, it needs to get over one lane to the left, but you can see this Prius is coming up really fast. Now, normally I would probably have waited for them to pass or something, but I confirmed the signal anyway, and it went for it, and then started to slow down for the whole maneuver. It seems that this roundabout that it's taking, it has a set speed that it wants to take it at, and it's just going to go ahead and do that. It also let this other BMW in front of me in the process, but it didn't really seem like that's why it was slowing down. But it definitely made that Prius behind me pretty angry. And rightfully so. This is where autopilot definitely felt like a student driver, cutting in front of this Prius at 60 miles an hour and then pretty immediately dropping down to 41. Now, in a similar situation right here, I wanted to see what autopilot would do. It wanted me to get into the carpool lane, but I saw how close this truck was behind me, and it just kind of went in front of him. I would say that's basically cutting off that car, and of course he got pretty mad at me and really wanted to show me how mad he was by drifting back into my lane. Again, student driver territory.
What's most interesting about autopilot for me is that I find myself reaching for the accelerator more than the brake. Now, with self-driving stuff, you would expect that you're reaching for the brake to, stop the car because it's missing something. But usually I need the car to actually keep driving because it's stopping for nothing. That happens far more often than the opposite.
Here's another example of a merge that autopilot ended up handling well, but it did beep at me, as you can hear right there. And it's basically just saying it was a little unsure for a second, and it just needs you to be there. Now here is another example of autopilot being extremely cautious. You can see there's a lot of distance between me and the car in front of me, and if you look, the speed's right about 58, and I'm not really sure why there is so much distance there, and my following distance was set fine. And that caused all these other cars around me to pass me and get pretty annoyed. And then autopilot handles this pretty well. This guy cuts me off right here, totally. And you can see my speed's at 65. He cuts me off. Autopilot does a great job right there, slowing down exactly the amount that's needed and not just slamming on the brakes. And while we're at it, one more example of autopilot being extremely cautious, merging onto the 101 south.
Slowing down again a ton. I'm just gonna let this happen, make all the cars behind me mad, but this is a very cautious, student driver-esque lane change.
Now this is an example of that thing where autopilot kind of rides the outside of the lane, and it's not very comfortable. It was super close to this car next to me, and if we look at the close-up, it knows it was super close. It has all those sensors going. It knows it's very far left in the lane and getting close to that car, so I always wonder why exactly it's staying there. So speaking of cautious lane changing, here is us merging onto the 405 South. Now at this point it actually switches to normal autopilot. It's not doing technically navigate on autopilot because it's not going to be changing lanes. It's just doing lane keeping for this merge. And so far it's good, even though it's a little bit more distance than I would like to the car in front of me. It's keeping that distance well, but you'll notice it just gets further and further as this change goes. And look at how slow this is going. And then look at how slow the acceleration is back up to the freeway. By the time I get on the freeway, it's the right speed, but it just makes everyone behind me mad. And here I'm trying to set my cruise control speed higher because it had dropped down to 50, but it still was just going to take this super slow no matter what. And if you look, there's actually a Mustang behind me, and he had to be pretty furious and just wondering, "You have a Tesla, why aren't you accelerating?" Also to note, my hand is there just in case, but autopilot is 100% steering. Now this is me finishing out my freeway driving, and it automatically signaled to get me over here, and this transition was actually pretty smooth. As you can see, it's slowing down pretty gradually there. Every once in a while it's kind of not smooth at all. It's kind of jumping 5 miles per hour at a time, slowing down. But this was very smooth. I was curious here if it was going to choose the right lane, and it didn't, so I just got out of auto steer right there. It's not too difficult to do, and now I'm just back to normal driving, and I handle all the driving for myself.
So that was navigate on autopilot for the freeway, but recently Tesla added the feature where it recognizes and responds to traffic lights and stop signs. Now this feature is clearly a beta, and when you click to go into it, they're very clear that it's going to be very cautious and it's going to improve over time, and I definitely saw that. In my neighborhood in particular, it's pretty bad. It recognizes them, but responding to them is just not great, and I'll show you real quick a couple clips of what that has been like. So just for fun, let's try navigate on city streets. Right now it's not going to steer for me, but it's accelerating and it's stopped at the stop sign, and it won't go until I look and confirm that it is clear to do so. Now this feature is definitely pretty jumpy right now. I mean, when you set the max, like what was that? What? The stop sign is a good 20 feet in front of us and it has stopped. So if I click proceed now, it's going to try to go all the way through there and I didn't even get to look. So, yeah, the biggest flaw with this I see is just that it always stops exactly on the line, which is great. That's what you're supposed to do, but it won't inch. You basically just stop and then confirm and it proceeds all the way through. So let's proceed here. This one's usually pretty awkward. Yep. Oh, okay. Going 15 now and a 25. It's a pretty natural stop right there. My one complaint is that on this street, there's a bunch of cars parked over here, and normally I would proceed forward a little bit, inch a little bit, and then go. I would stop at the stop sign, inch up, and then go. This I really can only go, but I just select on the drive stalk, and it takes off for me, and I'm turning, and it's, whoa, okay. Not great. Should be going 25. So this signal, since there's no car in front of me at this point, I will have to tap the drive stalk or tap the accelerator for it to actually proceed through the signal. But I am curious, I'm in auto steer, and this is crossing an intersection. Let's see how auto steer does right here. So I just confirmed, and it's going to proceed. And yep, there we go. Told me to take over because it did not know where the lines were.
And as you can see, it's very hard to see where those lines are basically until you're over there. And that's the biggest question people have with autopilot, is how exactly it's going to learn all that stuff.
Well, I hope this video is helpful for you to see how autopilot handles really tricky situations in a good way sometimes, and also handles really tricky situations in a bad way sometimes. I've become very comfortable with Navigate on Autopilot after using it for a few hours, and I recognize where it's going to do well and where I should probably be ready to take over and all that stuff. but you can just see how much it has improved and how much it is going to improve over time. Sometimes it changes lanes for seemingly no reason, and sometimes it's overly cautious, but at this point I'd rather it be overly cautious than overly dangerous. And I'm really excited to see 5 years from now how that all improves. I'm assuming it's going to be worlds better. In the meantime, make sure you're subscribed to this channel for lots more updates about the Model Y, Tesla, and tech in general. You can also subscribe to my other channel called And More, where I'm getting more in depth on certain subjects. Make sure to like this video if you appreciated it. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RyanShawTech. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.